nobody. Oh, yes, there are the two people there. Hello, welcome to Discovering Buddhism. That's what it is. Sorry I'm a bit late. Alan here with our normal Monday class. And just getting settled. Bit of traffic today. Okay, so let's start with our mindfulness meditation. A few minutes to settle ourselves. So with mindfulness meditation, there's two activities of the mind. There's one is remembering, that just mindfulness is keeping our attention on the object that we've chosen to focus on. So it's the breath in this case. And they call that remembering. It's an unusual way of using remembering because normally we think of remembering as something that happened in the past, but this is remembering what we're doing. So if we're focusing on the breath and then we wander off distracted by thoughts, then we've forgotten what we're doing. That's the way it's seen in Buddhist psychology. So remembering the object, and then the second one is introspection, which is the part of the mind just watching what we're doing to see whether we're still on the object, introspection. So a little bit of the mind is watching what we're doing, mindful of being mindful, just checking the guard, like the security guard. So that introspection, the quicker or the sooner we notice that we've actually lost our attention and being wandered off, then obviously the better we're doing the practice because we're being very quick to notice the distractions. On a bad day, it could take the whole session to actually notice that we're off with a distracting thought. On a good day, it might be just very quick, just a matter of a few seconds to notice that we're actually being distracted. So when we notice that, the main thing is to not judge ourselves, thinking that we're bad for losing the object. In fact, be very grateful or happy that we noticed, because that's really the practice, noticing when we lose our attention. And then we just let go that focus, let go that object, and then we come back to the breath without any judging or commentary or whatever. So that's all it is, really. It sounds so simple, but it's too simple, really, for the busy mind to be patient with, and it wants to go off and do something more interesting. But that's where we firmly bring it back to what we're doing. All right, let us start. We're now coming to our inner world, bringing our attention into what's happening in our body and what's happening in the mind. First of all, we just adjust our motivation, our outlook, and feel some gratitude to be able to sit, do some meditation, do some study of the Dharma. Amazing opportunity. The practice is not for our own benefit solely, it is to develop our minds, and we're developing our minds for the benefit of others, other beings. Eventually wanting to become a fully enlightened being so we can help others in the best possible way, like the Buddha did. So now start with our body, just making sure we're comfortable. feeling where our body contacts the floor or the chair, being aware of the spine and straightening the spine and feeling the shoulders comfortably relaxed. The face muscles and the eye muscles are relaxed, soften. And then we just noticing the breath coming and going, entering and leaving the body. Just observing. Nothing to change. Feeling the body moving with the breath. Also part of the mind checking, using introspection to watch the mind watching the breath. Checking for the wandering mind. Each one breath at a time, following the breath all the way into the body and following the breath out of the body. Just letting the thoughts come and go, paying no attention to them. They will be thoughts, but we stay with the breath. Okay, so let's have a look at the questions. I just got 3 questions there from last week, just to revise what we did, recall. So these are actually questions from the official question list from the DB people who wrote the course. So I'll actually use their official answers too. So, which, yeah, they're pretty good. I mean, not that I know much to judge the answers, but they're written for this course, particularly for this course. So what is emptiness? What is emptiness? This is a big question. There's anybody, well, it's hard if you're online. So Heather, do you remember? Something, it doesn't have to be technically perfect.
Like the non-existence of I.
Non-existence of a I. So does that does it mean that you don't exist at all? That means you're not here at the moment.
That the I, like, yeah, we don't know, like.
So the I
the Heather, like the ego, the sense of I.
The I is something that's solid and exists from its own side. That's probably what you mean to.
Yeah.
Something that you can hold on to and.
Yeah. Like a label.
Yeah. So I'll read you the answer that they've got. Emptiness is the absence of true or inherent existence. True or inherent, they use those interchangeably. It's the ultimate truth. It's a characteristic of everything that exists. So it's a characteristic of the I, which is what we focus on. That it's absent of true or inherent existence. But that's the key, really. So the object, they call it this object to be refuted. This is the object that they say is in the back of our minds, an instinctive sense that I exist in a very concrete way, that there's an unchanging part of it. We know that with the body ages and so on, but the mistake is to not see that there is no inherent existence. We actually feel that there is something from the side of us. That's what they're saying. Absence of true or inherent existence. True is, I think you don't see that quite so much. It's usually the word inherent existence. Existence from its own side is what Lama Zopa uses. I quite like the word there's no essence, the feeling that there's no building blocks. There's nothing there that is the base, something that's solid. Yeah. So I quite like the word essence. There's no essence in anything, the outside physical world, or what they call conditioned phenomena. Everything that we experience out there and everything that we sense is ourself and the ultimate truth. So if we actually realise that this is the way we exist, which is what Buddha did when he became enlightened under the Bodhi tree, and we can hold that as not just while we're sitting on the cushion, but see how everything exists in fact, the way it is, we are an enlightened being. That's the way. So that's what enlightenment is said to be. So you can see that there's nothing existing inherently, and of course it's it's an incredible. So this is enlightenment. This is why it's not just an academic exercise, like a philosophical exploration of how things exist. But as I think we looked at last week, Shantideva said everything that is taught in Buddhism everything the Buddha taught is to help us get to this stage of realizing wisdom, realizing emptiness, to have that realization. And it's so profound, so subtle. Even the Buddha himself had to think about, I can't remember how many days, but it might have been about a week. He stayed contemplating whether he could actually teach what he'd experienced. He said it was so difficult, so profound. He wasn't sure that anyone would understand it. So he contemplated whether it was worth actually trying to teach beings who weren't enlightened what he'd experienced, which, like, fortunately he did decide to teach and spent the rest, 30 or 40 years of his life teaching. So just the characteristics of everything that exists. So there is, as we'll see tonight, as we said last week, it's not something we're going to get straight away. Something that we can work on gradually by doing various meditations. Impermanence is a good one. We're going to do that tomorrow. Impermanence. Looking at the labelling, which is a method that Lama Zopa uses. So it's step by step. And last week we did how the I appears, how the I appeared, which is this. If we look carefully, especially if the I is very prominent, such as when we're being criticised and so on, the I can come forward, then we might be able to see that analyse whether it actually, in fact, exists the way it appears. That is there anything concrete there? So we look at the body, see if we can find anything in the body. Can't find a self in an organ or anywhere physically, and then we look at whether the mind can have the I. So something that's solid, unchanging in the mind, and we can't find it. So, but we know when we say we're sitting here in the cushion, there is something there. So we conclude there isn't anything that's inherently existent, but there is something here, and that's called conventional, the conventional I, the I that we label on what we experience. We experience this collection of mind and body, the aggregate, and something's here, and we put the I on that. So that's called conventional existence. It's a label. Anyway, so that's the official answer. Okay. Now, what is ignorance? So, yeah, where are we? What is ignorance? That's the second one. Yeah. What is ignorance? So, this is, I'll read you the official answer. It's an active misknowledge of reality. When I saw that word misknowledge, I don't think I've ever heard of it. It's understanding. So misknowledge, I don't think is actually a real word. So it's a misunderstanding of reality. It's the cause of psychic existence. Okay, so not realizing the absence of inherent existence. That's ignorance, and that's the cause of all our problems, every suffering that we experience, every disappointment. It's the cause of uncontrolled death and rebirth, quote. It's also the cause of the destructive emotions, quote. It is the misapprehension of your self-identity. It's also the misapprehension of everything else. It's the concept that adheres to true or inherent existence. Yeah. So if we don't realize emptiness, that's the definition in this context. Is said to be ignorant of how things exist. That's ignorance. So it's a special meaning of ignorance. And of course, everybody who's not enlightened being or a very high bodhisattva, high bodhisattvas who are on the way to becoming Buddhas, can experience wisdom realizing emptiness for short periods of time. When they're meditating, they can actually see the false I arising, and they can see how it appears to be solid and concrete, but they don't believe it, they don't grasp at it like we would as unenlightened beings. they can see they're getting close to experiencing the wisdom realizing emptiness. So what's the last one? What does emptiness have to do with liberation and enlightenment? Okay, the liberation. These are the practices that lead to nirvana, and the people who are the practitioners who are wanting to liberate themselves from suffering. And enlightenment is the full Buddhahood, those who are doing the same. They're realizing emptiness, but for the benefit of others, to help others get out of the suffering of samsara. Okay, I'll just look at the official answer. What does emptiness have to do? So the view of emptiness is the path to liberation, because it's the actual antidote to ignorance. It's the path to enlightenment also, but must be conjoined with compassion to reach that goal. So the difference between the self-liberation person, it uses compassion, but not as intensely as the person on the path to enlightenment. But this is the Mahayana path that we actually teach in our Tibetan Buddhist teaching. Yeah. So, path to liberation. Wisdom realizing emptiness combined with compassion, but we'll sow the seeds for that, for enlightenment, hopefully in the next few lifetimes. That's enough of that, I think. Anything else? Any questions? No. Okay. So I added a few references here. First one, virtual reality. Virtual reality. I've just discovered this week. It's a fantastic book. It's tiny. Just this little. It's actually a free book, which came out probably 5 or 10 years ago by Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. These publishers who publish Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa's teaching, and we'll probably refer to that quite a bit tonight because I'm using some of Lama Zopa's meditations and teachings on emptiness. So that's great, and you'll find that at centres, I'm sure we've got free copies around here, or also definitely on e-books. I think you could download it from the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive onto your e-book, if you have Amazon or whatever. Or you could just find a hard copy. So you might have to pay if it's Amazon you're using. You might have to pay $1 or so. It's a nominal amount. Insight and Emptiness. I didn't actually bring the book, but that's a good, much deeper book at Emptiness by Kensur Jumper Tektrog, who I have never met, but he's a very famous teacher. I think one of Zopa's and Lama Yeshe's teachers, and so that's taught to a series of teachings to Westerners, I think, in America. And then the last one is what I watched I think a few days ago. I actually happened to watch His Holiness the Dalai Lama on YouTube teaching the Heart Sutra. I think it was might have been at the weekend, Friday or Saturday. And he was teaching a group of students in Taiwan. And the Heart Sutra is probably one of the most well-known Buddhist teachings on emptiness. It got many teachings in the second turning of the wheel in Rajgira. Second turning of the wheel, he taught emptiness and series of sutras and teachings on emptiness. And this is a nice the shortest one called the Heart Sutra. It actually fits on a page. I'll send it out next week with the notes next week. And we'll have a look at it. But His Holiness is teaching it for about an hour or two and doing question and answers on it. It's really, really worth having a look. In English, it's in many languages too. but in English it seems to be very well translated. So it's okay. So tonight we're just looking at, there's just a note there from that first paragraph on page 1, from His Holiness, that one. If we have compassion for ourselves, we want to be free of suffering and its causes, which he calls dukkha, Sanskrit word. And the wisdom realizing emptiness purifies karma afflictions that causes dukkha. So karma and the afflictions, remember? Afflictions are these, ignorance is one of them, and also attachment and aversion. Anger, attachment and ignorance are the three big ones, the three mental afflictions. And from those, because they're very ingrained in our way of thinking, we do actions that are powered or motivated by anger, attachment and ignorance, and that causes us to do karmic, sows karmic seeds on the mind stream. Our actions of body, speech and mind, if they're motivated by ignorance, attachment, anger, then it's going to have a negative, these are negative emotions. So there'll be a negative effect, karmic effect. So this is this rolling effect of karma. Karma is action, literally translated as action. So action is driven by the mind, and the mind is, until we enlighten, is under the influence of these, what they call afflictions, or wrong, misknowledge, misknowledge or misunderstanding. Misunderstanding the way things exist, not understanding the wisdom realizing. So this is a gradual process to get full realizations of emptiness, and so we can actually make a start by just doing various practices, listening to teaching, the three ways of studying the Dharma: listen, hearing, so hearing teaching, which includes reading, hearing, going to teaching, reading the Dharma, reading teachings from our Dharma teachers, then contemplation, thinking about them. So that could be in terms of looking at different angles, analysing, maybe even debating. I mean, traditionally the Tibetan monks debate in a very systematic and forceful way. And then the last one is meditating. Okay, meditating. So meditating means that's the process of making it part of our way of thinking. So, so that's important. So that's why, you know, the teachings are not just taught, but we also have meditation practice and so on to integrate the actual teaching into our mind. And that's why we're doing this particular focus in wisdom realizing emptiness, the emptiness topic, on this calm abiding single point of meditation, because that calm mind is needed to study wisdom realizing emptiness. It's called insight, resting that calm mind on the way the I exists in our mind, getting insight to seeing that I is actually has no inherent existence. It's just a label, a construct, a concept. So to actually experience that, the mind has to be very calm. So that's why that's how you need to have good concentration. You don't have to have perfect single point of consciousness to start studying emptiness. Both Geshe Lamas open all the teachers and His Holiness say you can start studying the teachings on emptiness by using these various different analytical, conceptual, using the conceptual part of the mind to think about things like how everything's impermanent. Because if it's impermanent, it's changing. There's nothing to think about, nothing to hold on to. So that's just that brings us to the notes I've got there about impermanence. So, so impermanence is often taught as like an introductory stage of the teaching the more deeper levels of emptiness. So impermanence is what they call the gross level, where we actually think of our own bodies dying, slowly getting older, and the world itself. You know, we can see how the things we use in the material world, our cars, our computers, our houses, they're gradually, sometimes more than gradually, disintegrating. As they arise, they disintegrate. Nothing ever stays the same. It's a process of creation and disintegration. So, so the meditations on impermanence cover these different things: our own body, and then the mind itself, how the mind is changing from one moment to the next. You can see that when we do our mindfulness practice, how there's so many thoughts coming and going. When we notice how during our day we might feel quite elated at some time, feel happy, then we might feel sort of a neutral feeling, and then we have some sort of anxiety or worry. It's just all these different moods and phases of the mind. So we'll do a practice at the end of the class tonight on impermanence, and we'll try and integrate that into another practice which Lama uses on how the I exists, similar to what we did last week, how the self exists. So, so together, why is everything impermanent? Why is it not stable? It's because of everything is subject to cause conditions. So this, although it looks like this room is kind of the same every time we come into it, that's the gross level appears to be the same, but over time we know that at the micro level, the subatomic level, things are changing. So the paint, for example, I've been living in my house for 20 years and I painted it 20 years ago. I can actually notice now that the paint has deteriorated quite dramatically. Time for another painting job. That's because it's deteriorating at the microscopic level, and over a period of years it becomes obvious. So the same with the bricks, about the carpet, these things that appear at the gross level, the coarse level, look to be the same, but because moment by moment, even second by second, Lama says, microsecond by microsecond, these changes are happening at probably the quantum level, the subatomic level. So these subtle changes lead to the gross changes that we notice. Same with our body. The body's apparently the explanation for aging is that the cells as they die are replaced and never replaced exactly the same. But there's always a slight mistake in reproducing the cells, so the wrinkles appear and the skin loses its youthfulness. It's by the process of replacement. Okay, so just having a look. And of course, probably I think a really good example is the coronavirus, the epidemic, how everything changed so quickly. And just the tiny molecular subatomic particles of the virus, it's tiny. What actually did the damage is has actually changed our whole way of life. It's changed the economy of the world. It's changed our movements, our everyday life, our jobs, our health, our body. So many have become either have died or have not recovered, become sick. Those who've been infected I think I heard, just listening to the radio this afternoon, that it's something like 40% of people who are infected have a lingering after effect. It's still, they have these long, I think they're called long-term COVID. So they might have fatigue, maybe months or years. Because it's such a recent virus, it's only been around a year or so. We're still not sure how long these after effects will last. But so these are quite common things. So this incredible pandemic has been caused by something unbelievably tiny. The virus can only be observed by special microscopes, which they've only had in the last, say, 20 or 30, 40 years. And then, of course, the things like climate change is another good example. And also at the universe level, we hear about galaxies rising and falling, and stars collapsing and coming to the end of life, and then being reborn in the astrophysics, is that what they call it? I think so, at the universal level. So now the labelling approach. So I've taken these notes from Lama's Opus 4. He gives a fantastic teaching on explaining how the using phenomena. He starts off with impermanence of phenomena, sort of the outside world. He starts off with a cup, actually, with a bell. And I've actually just changed it to cup because I've got a cup here and I don't have a bell. So the cup, let's have a look at it. I can't actually, unless I hold it, it won't be in the picture. Doesn't matter. So we just present it as a cup. So he's using an object to analyze and check how the mind, we're not talking about an unenlightened mind, will perceive that object and see it as existing, as a true existing cup, something that lacks emptiness. How we actually see it before we study and apply the teachings of emptiness. So he says basically the way we see all phenomena, all causative phenomena, things that are subject to cause and conditions, which is all the external world, and ourselves, are all just names. So we attach names to what we see, and those names are just labels. But actually, even though they're just labels, we see them as more than just labels. We see them as actually objects existing from their own side. So, for example, with the cup, that's pierced to the mind, pierced to our eyes. We see the white. We see something that's a certain shape, and we see the colour, shape. We actually see that we know that that has a use, that it's used for drinking, for holding beverages, and that's what he calls the base. That's what, in this analysis of looking at how we attach labels to it, to phenomena. So there's a base, which is something that's white, looks as though it's made of some sort of ceramic. It has a function. The function is to hold water or liquid, which we drink. So this base is what on that we label the cup. We see it as cup. So the valid mind, he says, it's not just the label, but you need what you call a valid base. So if we put the word cup onto a bell or my watch, that would be, we'd know that was wrong because there's no valid base. It doesn't have these characteristics, the ceramic, the shape, and the function. So you can't just, it's not just putting a label on anything. He also gives the example, labeling, cutting up pieces of cardboard and calling them $100 bill. We're labeling them $100 bills. That won't actually make them into $100 bills. Or calling, the second example he uses, calling ourselves the President of the United States, and just putting that label on ourselves or somebody who's not the president. So there's no, that's, the base has to be valid. It has to have this, what we conventionally require for the object that we're going to use, which is the cup or the watch. So so that's the valid base, which is there, and then our observing eye has to also be a proper, a clear and unobstructed eye. So, example, if we have, they usually use the example of jaundice or hepatitis, where if you have that disease, everything looks yellow. So it makes everything, the outside world, appear to be yellow, where it's not. So this is because of the eye faculty, our eyes, is obscure. It has a disease, so we actually not seeing things the way a healthy person would. So we need a valid base, and we need a proper functioning eye faculty that can actually not be distorted, or we're not under the influence of drugs where we might hallucinate. We're not sort of have mental illness, so we might also hallucinate. But we have, as a subjective observer, we have a set of faculties that can actually perceive things accurately. So if you've got that, the valid base, the valid perceiver, perception, then we put the label, the cup, on that thing that we see, the white object. So that's so this is kind of the process. So Rinpoche says all that's happening is that you're getting the valid base and you're putting a label on it. There's nothing else. He says that's it. There's nothing coming from the cup. But what we do, what the ignorant mind sees, is that the cup is not just merely labeled. It's what he calls something that's slightly more than that. We put an extra layer, something existing from its own side. Now, he said that's completely wrong, although we have this instinct that we had from birth and from previous lifetime to see the external objects as existing from their own side. It's wrong. So we actually put this slightly more than just a collection of characteristics and a label. We actually put something else on top. So this is the extra icing we put on the cake. And not only that, but we grasp that as being completely true. And this is what it calls where the hallucination begins. So the hallucination begins, it's not something we do intentionally, it's left by imprints on the mind from this is a way we've been thinking from countless previous lives. Okay, so what we're doing is looking to see whether that's a correct process. So the enlightened beings can see that this is not the correct process. They have wisdom realizing emptiness. So what we forget is what we're imputing cup on that collection, that base, and grasping it as something that actually exists out there. So this is the explanation using an external object, And the same can apply, he says, to all sensory things. So if we hear a sound, everything that comes into the sensory world, sounds, sights, tastes, and so on, everything we see in the supermarket, all the billions of things we see in one day, all go through this process that we see these objects and we put this extra layer that thing exists from its own side. There's something more than just this collection of parts with a label. We see that as absolutely true. So I'll just might quote you something from Rinpoche's teachings on this. He actually unpicks it quite well. I can just find the spot here. So this is the process, he said. After explaining the, using the example of a bell, and I'm using the example of a cup. Just to give you a quote. So he says, so this, I'll use the word cup, this cup, or anything we look at, is nothing other than that which is merely labelled by the mind. But our minds are so replete with negative imprints left by past ignorance, our way of thinking in past life, the simultaneously born concept of inherent existence, that's the imprint he's talking about. Even though things exist as merely labelled by the mind, we hold on to them as if they exist from their own side. We apprehend them as inherently existing, not merely imputed by the mind. But then he goes a little bit deeper. He says there are three things in the evolution of how this mistake happens. He says, first of all, our mind labels the object. So we see the cup and we immediately give the word cup. Of course, if it's another language, we use a different sound. Second, the negative imprints left by previous concepts of inherent existence project an appearance of inherent existence, that the object we're looking at now exists from its own side, that there's a real cup there, not a cup from our mind. The cup exists from the side of the cup. And he says this is totally, in infinite underlying the wrong idea, a complete hallucination projected onto the cup. Then thirdly, the third step, we allow our mind to believe that this is 100% true. We allow our mind to hold on to this, to grasp this as completely 100% true, that there is a real cup there. That's the reality. And this is ignorance, he says. So that's the analysis of an external object, cup. But then if we apply that to the self, the sense of self, the sense of self is the most damaging, just to feel that the self exists from its own side. That's the thing that keeps us in samsara. That there's this inherently existing self on top of the aggregates. Remember last week we looked at Buddhist philosophy looks at a person. What is a person? They look at it as the five aggregates. One is physical, the body, and the other are the mental aggregates of different functions of the mind. The mind, the discriminating mind, can tell one thing from the other. The mind of the consciousness, I can't remember them offhand, but there are actually four mental factors as well. So that the physical body and the four functions of the mind is the self, and that exists, but we on top of that, we make the mistake of putting that there is actually not only that, but there's like an Alan. We give that the name Alan for me, for the person, and then we think mistakenly we give that Alan more than just the aggregates and just the physical body. We put something on top of it. So he says it's actually just a slight exaggeration, putting something in that's going to actually, to us, make us think that there's something there from its own side when it's not. That is actually the cause of samsara, cause of all our delusions and so on, all our staying in cyclic existence, this misapprehension of the self. So, of course, this is all something that, to the beginner, this sounds completely ridiculous because it's so different to the way we've actually been thinking. We've never been to normal through normal Western education. Everything is taught as if it is as it appears, except possibly in quantum physics, which I think I mentioned last week, because quantum physics, and His Holiness mentioned this over the weekend when he was teaching the Heart Sutra, said the quantum physics is a good, seems to help, seems to be moving towards the Buddhist position, that the more the material object is broken down, the less we get to any fundamental building block. And the way we see the micro world depends on how we look at it. This is part of the extraordinary dilemma of quantum physics. How we look at an experiment, how we fire these subatomic particles, how we set up the experiment can determine how the result is. How we look at it determines what we get. So there's an experiment that I can't remember the name of it, where we can actually look at photons, which are little particles of light. Depending on how we set up the experiment, they can actually act as waves or particles, photons or particles. But it depends how we look at it, how the experimenter, the observer, sets up the experiment. They will behave differently according to how we look at them. So that means that the mind is actually affecting what the reality of what we're looking at out there. It's breaking down this subject-object duality. Okay, so just looking, where are we? So in the notes, I've got a few, some of the notes that were in the original notes from White Trial, because I've actually put a collection of different teachings from different people. And so he's using slightly different terminology, but saying the same thing. And he says the idea of self, coarse idea of self, is different. There are different schools of Buddhist philosophy. We take the most coarse idea of self is that it exists as permanent and unchanging, unitary and partless, and independent. So permanent and unchanging is self, something that is actually going to stay there forever, like a soul that will never be altered over time. I think the Hindus call it Atman, an unchanging self. Unitary and partless, so there's only one, like a partless part. If you accept the idea that, which Buddhists don't, that there are building blocks that can't be broken down, partless part, then this is all part of the definition of something that's permanent and independent, doesn't depend on causes, condition. So this is completely rejected by all Buddhist schools. All different levels of Buddhist schools reject that there is a permanent and unchanging self, unitary and partless and independent. So it's not difficult, really, even just looking at the body, it can't be. There's no permanent, unchanging body. Definitely not. And then the idea of something that is not subject to causes, conditions. That's being independent. Everything, according to Buddha's teachings, is something. All phenomena that we observe in the world, external and internal, is subject to causes, conditions. Okay, so that sort of very gross concept of permanent and permanency is something that we learn. But the more subtle one, the one that Sopa's talking about, this idea that there's something more than just the aggregates. There's something more that's put on that is a self-existing self, a truly existing self. That's more subtle, and that comes from the imprints on the mind over countless rebirths, countless times, countless rebirths where we've been acting under the influence of ignorance. But they're instinctive. Okay, so Wachong's got some examples of different types of change. Quite interesting. There are things that changes, so we can have different levels. He's given an example of changes that happen, big changes, birth, aging, sickness, and death in the person, and then within that person's lifetime, we've got like the phase of childhood, which is, changeable. So the child, as they go into adolescence, they leave childhood, they become an adolescent, and as the adolescent period develops, and the person becomes an adult, and then the next period is middle age. So these are sort of little phases within the person's lifetime. So those changes are obvious when you think about them, but we don't always think of them as like little changes within phases within the big change of old age, sickness, and death. So then there's these changes that happen in the mind, and he gives example of anger, how anger can just come out of nowhere. If it's just some little thing that what we might be a button, something someone says or does, and it sets us off so completely calm and relaxed, and then somebody says something and presses the button, and our emotional situation changes completely, and we're feeling this incredible anger, and it just happens instantly without any control. So these are very fast states of mind, mental emotions. And then these thoughts that when we're doing mindfulness meditation, we can see how quickly some thoughts are coming and going, like little memories of what happened today, maybe little flashes of what's going to happen tomorrow or later tonight. So you can see these little very, very fast thoughts coming and going, incredibly fast. So there's nothing that doesn't change, basically, within the aggregates, the physical aggregates, the body, or the mental aggregates, the different states of mind. Okay, so I might just introduce the meditation, and basically it's impermanence. So this is really helpful to not just the idea of getting some feeling of emptiness, which is the essenceless of phenomena, but it also helps us to develop things like patience, and seeing that our views are impermanent. So we see that we might think that the difficult person, the person who we have been accustomed to feeling uncomfortable with, is always going to be like that. But if you think about the impermanence of, say, a difficult person, at one stage that difficult person wasn't in our lives, they were a neutral person. And the difficult person may change. There are times, maybe we can remember times in our life where we've reconciled with somebody, we've had a difficult start to a friendship, maybe at work, something, and then we've actually got to like them. We've realised that that person is not what we actually labelled them in the beginning. They're actually a really nice person, but we actually took something the wrong way, they said, something like that. So the difficult person might have seemed always difficult at the beginning, but when we look back, we see that we can actually change our attitude. And it was actually our attitude. There was no difficult person from their own side. If the person was always difficult from their own side, then we wouldn't be possible to see them as a friend, someone who we like. Okay? So it helps us to realise that the prism, the glasses that we're looking through, is what makes that person either a friend, enemy. There's nothing really there. That person who is difficult is somebody's best, most closest partner, husband, wife, or whatever. How can they be intrinsically difficult if somebody else thinks that they're the best person in the world? But this can help break down these sort of our own labelling of people. And the same with ourselves. The idea that we might think, oh, I'm always going to be a bad meditator, never going to be able to concentrate. I'm not artistic, so I'll never be able to do that sort of thing. But in the right conditions, we can actually see that these sort of labels, putting ourselves in a box, are self-limiting. We're limiting ourselves. There's nothing that's inherently not a good meditator. Everybody can actually do the practices. There might be more hindrances. You might have to build up more purification, do more, making offerings and doing more of the 7 limbs to help clear the hindrances. But everybody has the potential to become enlightened being. We're told that everyone has Buddha nature. So there's no inherently not clever. So there's no inherently not clever, not attractive, not wise, not good meditative person. You can help break down that. And so the other thing with attachment, the seeing the person, this is the opposite to seeing someone as an enemy, seeing something as someone as perfect and thinking that person provide lasting happiness. And this is the answer to all my problems. This person will make me whole. Again, completely unrealistic expectations. What we're doing is, again, putting too much we're seeing qualities there that aren't there, perfect qualities. There's no perfect person. We all have our defects and all our shortcomings. But this, again, seeing that the view that we have somebody as being just the right person can change. That person can, we can marry that person and get divorced a few years later. We can see that person as a great friend, and then they say something and it hurts us very much, and so we don't like that person anymore. So these changes can go. We can change our situation from good health to bad. Pandemic, good example, everything going perfectly, and then we've got this unbelievable disease going around the world. How quickly that change. You can have success in business, and then the karma ends, and we go from wealth to poverty. We might be homeless, just from completely unexpected. So these conditions can change depending on karma, our merit and so on. Or the opposite, we can go from poverty to being wealthy, and go from poor health to good health. So just realizing this, we let go. It's easier to let go when you use these meditations on impermanence. There's less to hold on to because you realize there's nothing there that's going to provide lasting annoyance or lasting satisfaction. So in the actual practice, we start with the body and we go into the cells and so on. From our own body, we look at other people's bodies. Probably very good to look at. Sometimes, if you're as old as me, and you look in the mirror, or you're walking down the street and you look at a reflection of yourself, you wonder who that old person is there. But sometimes I look at my hand, and I thought that's my grandmother's hand, or my father's hand, or that look wasn't there 30 years ago. So I have this sort of stuck image that I'm a person of intermediate age, maybe 40 or something. And then when you look at the aging of the body, it's shock. I think some psychologists said if you actually looked at yourself, say, if you aged instantly, you'd die of shock. Okay, if you're 40, then you're suddenly 70. The actual shock of seeing that deterioration in the way you look could actually cause you to have a heart attack. But it's happens so slowly, so you sort of get used to the reality, but you don't actually really let go of the idea that you're actually still a bit young. So if you say, that old person, oh, it's me, I thought that was my father, it looks a bit like my father. But these sort of things, so the mind hasn't caught up with the aging process. So then we look at our mind, and I'll just quickly skip through it, because it's better to actually do the practice, and we think of all the experience of pleasant, unpleasant, happy, sad, different emotion, and then we look at the external world, which is the changing physical world we're in, changing immediate world, and changing environment, and so on. And then we look at the conclusion. Okay, let's do it. It's already 8:15. I think because we started a bit late. Okay, get comfortable. Okay, we begin our practice on impermanence as a way of helping us understand the wisdom realizing emptiness. Just starting with our self, our body. Think, who is this physical person sitting here, meditating, thinking of the parts of the body, the organs. The body is this collection of parts. The organs, the blood, the bones, the marrow. At the micro level, there's these cells. The cells are composed of atoms and molecules. The atoms and molecules are composed of subatomic particles. And constantly, the body is changing. The cells are aging, being replaced. The air is entering the body as oxygen, travelling through the lungs, through the blood, around the body, and converted to carbon dioxide, chemical changes. The body, over time, is aging. Thinking of our body as young persons, the changes that have happened over time, skin is wrinkling, the organs may have declined, the joints may be replaced, replacing. And then the ultimate impermanence is when we have to leave the body at the time of death. This body will have to be discarded. The mind will leave the body at the time of death. Nothing to hold on to here physically. We can see in our own life we've lost relatives, friends, pets, their bodies have died. The loss of close family members, loved ones. The realisation of impermanence helps deal with grief. It's less of a shock when it happens. We understand impermanence. Nothing lasts. The moment we're born, we start deteriorating, heading towards the death. Now looking at the mind, so ever-changing states of mind, just thinking the happy mind, sad, down mind, anxious mind, worrying mind, the neutral mind. You might be experiencing these over one day, different times of the day, different minds, different emotions. Each pleasant experience, meeting something pleasant, will end. Each unpleasant experience will be followed by an end. The pleasant experience doesn't last, now just there's the unpleasant. Each meeting is followed by a parting. The negative states of mind are based on misconceptions, anger, attachment, ignorance. They're impermanent. They have no solid base. They can be eradicated completely, purified. They can be eradicated completely, purified, completely. They're based on ignorance. Ignorance can be replaced by the wisdom realizing emptiness. These negativities are like clouds. We have Buddha nature, behind the clouds, the sky of Buddha nature, unstained. The negative emotions can be removed, revealing Buddha nature, the Buddha mind. Similarly, the external world, our environment, thinking of how our life can be changed suddenly by changes in the external world, the recent pandemic, how it's changed our physical world, completely unforeseen. In samsara, nothing is certain. Something that seems secure, safe, can suddenly become a place of change, of disease, death, destruction. physical world changes, thinking of changes in our neighbourhood, changes to the physical structure of the city. Slowly deterioration of our houses, our cars, our utilities, all gross changes driven by tiny changes moment by moment, atomic, subatomic level. All this is happening moment by moment. Changes in our life, changes in our mind, changes in our external world. All phenomena dependent on causes and conditions. Cause and condition. All phenomena dependent on causes and conditions. Cause and conditions change, so the phenomena change. This is samsara, this is the reality. So the conclusion is, by having a deep understanding or realization of impermanence, helps us develop a sense of renunciation, not having expectations, unrealistic expectations from this world, that things will last. Expecting impermanence, expecting change. Of course, all phenomena are subject to cause and conditions. They're empty from their own side. There's nothing inherently existing, inherently independent existing on their own side. This helps us realize emptiness. Impermanence is a step towards understanding emptiness. Finally, impermanence helps us realize and develop compassion. Other beings also suffering from ignorance on the way things exist, holding on to pleasant experiences permanent, suffering when they're not permanent. Wanting happiness, not wanting suffering, but getting unwanted suffering. We're in samsara, so we'll experience impermanence, change. And finally, I'll just conclude with the special dedication from Lama Zopa during the pandemic, dedicating for the sick, or those, however many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed from all sickness. May all the sickness without exception of all transmigrating beings never occur again. May the Buddha Dhamma last for a long time, dedicating to that. Okay, thanks so much. Thanks for being here. Have a great week, and we'll see you again next week, same time. So thank you for those people out there. Just say good night.